Bill Ackman is a pretty famous investor, though not for purely good reasons. He has made huge amounts of money through his fund, which focuses mostly on chain restaurants and fast food, but his knowledge and expertise is far more widespread than that. He is, by all measures, a very successful investor and has certainly earned himself a reputation to go along with that. When he speaks, we ought to listen, but we ought also to think about some potential ulterior motives that he might have in the back of his mind. Ackman has a notable history of taking short positions and then using his name and influence to try and tank a stock or even a market. He infamously did so against Herbalife throughout the 2010s and then again when the virus hit and lockdown started in 2020. He went on TV and told everyone hell is coming, that they ought to sell every stock they own because it's only going downhill from there. Of course, once the market tanked, he exited his short positions, made a lot of money, and bought back into the market, making himself billions in the process, but costing a lot of other people who trusted him millions as well. But what has he got to say now, and what might his ulterior motives be this time? Well, that's what we're going to cover today. But first, make sure to leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like private live streams, extra videos, and buy and sell alerts from my own personal portfolio. So what exactly did Ackman come out and say? Well, he put out these tweets. I gave a presentation to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York last week to share our views on inflation and Fed policy. The bottom line, we think the Fed should taper immediately and begin raising rates as soon as possible. We are continuing to dance while the music is playing and it is time to turn down the music and settle down. As we have previously disclosed, we have put our money where our mouth is in hedging our exposure to an upward move in rates, as we believe that a rise in rates could negatively impact our long-only equity portfolio. So Ackman there basically just explained that he gave a presentation to the New York Fed and that the overarching thesis of his talk was that the markets are fraught with risk and that the Fed needs to taper immediately and raise rates as well in order to preserve financial stability. He also said that he is positioning his fund to do well as interest rates rise in a preemptive attempt to stop people from claiming that he's just trying to manipulate the market. From these tweets and Ackman's positions in the market, which are publicly known, it is clear that he really does think that it's time for the music to stop playing and for investors to stop dancing. Tough times are ahead.
So, what you're telling me is that the music is about to stop.
But what exactly are his concerns and what are his arguments that back them? Well, luckily for us, his speech detailed this all for us and I'm going to condense it all for you. So the first thing that Ackman discusses in his talk is what the aims of the Federal Reserve are and the state of the economy in regards to those aims. Now, it should be pretty clear at this point, but the Fed is almost obsessed with reducing unemployment and getting people to work. Now, this is a fair target, to be honest, as it's a very important thing for an economy, and in the wake of the lockdown, unemployment was very high. Now, usually the Fed would also have aims surrounding inflation and they would want to keep it sitting at around about 2% a year. At this rate, it encourages people to spend their cash, which benefits the economy and everyone in it, but it isn't such a huge inflation rate that prices spiral out of control. It's a happy medium which almost every country in the world aims to meet. Obviously, right now, inflation isn't sitting at 2% in the US or in pretty much any other Western nation either, yet the Fed, up until very recently, hasn't really cared about this. They said over and over again that their primary aim is to reduce unemployment, to get more people working, and that if inflation rises as a result of their actions, well then that's okay as long as more people have jobs. What Bill Ackman spends the first 20 minutes of his speech talking about is the belief he has that the primary aim of the Fed has been achieved and that it's time for the Fed to start paying attention to inflation and fighting that instead of letting it continue to mount. He pointed out that the government put out huge amounts of support for businesses and people throughout the lockdowns and that the government was very successful in preventing a real recession from taking hold. Dropping interest rates to what basically amounts to 0 in nominal terms and -6 in real terms has stimulated the markets to a massive degree as well. What Ackman is critical of, however, is how the Fed has been using a wait-and-see approach, and that has caused huge risks for the market and the economy as inflation has not been given the attention it should have. Over the course of the pandemic, 25 million jobs were lost in the US, but 20 million have been recreated in the following year. Unemployment is currently sitting at about 4.8% compared to the 3.5% before the lockdowns. There are almost 8 million unemployed people in the US, but there are over 10 million job openings in the country as well. 500,000 new jobs are being created every month on top of that, suggesting that within a year or so, the total number of jobs in the country will probably reach pre-pandemic levels. All of this suggests that the Fed has achieved its primary goal of stimulating employment and that it's time to change their tune. So why were the Fed holding off on tapering and raising rates in the past? Well, one of the big reasons was because of the threat of the Delta variant and what it might do. The belief was that because this variant was more transmissive and had caused cases to spike in a number of different countries, it could cause a return to the lockdowns of the past, and if that were the case, the Fed would need to keep the money printers back on and keep rates at zero to stimulate the economy. But the fears around the Delta variant never really materialized. Cases rose a bit, but by and large continued to fall, and hospitalizations and deaths saw a similar trend as well. The variant wasn't immune to vaccinations as many people had claimed it would be, and by and large they continued to work against this variant. From Ackman's point of view, it is no longer credible, and it actually never was credible, to use the existence of the Delta variant as an excuse to keep monetary policy loose. And that leads us, and it led Ackman nicely, into the real reason the Fed's policy absolutely has to change, and it is, of course, inflation. It's no secret that inflation is high. It's been high for months, but it is only recently that mainstream media has been paying any meaningful attention to it. It's high across the board, from food prices and energy to new and used vehicles and housing. Now, when Ackman made this speech, inflation was sitting at about 5%, but since then, it has shot up even more to 6%, making his case even stronger. Ackman looked at historical precedent and the economic conditions that led to tighter monetary policy in the past and compared it to today to strengthen his case as well. In 1987, unemployment was higher than today and inflation was lower than today, and that led to interest rate hikes. In 1994, unemployment was higher than today and inflation was lower than today, and that led to interest rate hikes. The same can be said for 1999, 2004, and 2015. In all of the examples of recent interest rate hikes, unemployment was higher than today and inflation was lower, and yet in the past, tighter monetary policy was adopted, whereas over the last year, the Fed merely covered their eyes, buried their heads in the sand, and pretended that there wasn't a problem. Ackman pointed out the fact that not everyone is running away from their problems, however, most notably the Bank of England and the International Monetary Fund. The Bank of England has changed its tune and seems very intent on ensuring that everyone knows that they acknowledge the risk of inflation, that it's too high, and that they are not going to sit back as it continues to rise. They have already warned that they will need to act to reduce inflation, and that means raising interest rates in the UK very soon. The story from the IMF is much the same. They have warned of the dangers of rising inflation and claimed that the Fed should be preparing to tighten their monetary policy lest inflation run out of control. They basically said that if they continue to prioritize employment, inflation will find itself in a positive feedback loop, getting higher and higher, and that is how a country loses control of its currency. Basically, what Ackman said, and what he seems very intent on being heard saying, is that the Fed needs to taper now, and it needs to do it quickly. It also needs to raise interest rates and stop inflation from spiraling out of control. The Fed has achieved its goal of stimulating employment. There are more job openings in the US right now than ever before, and every single unemployed person could have a job if they wanted to. So the time for the Fed to be pursuing a maximum employment strategy has ended. Now, at the time that Ackman made this speech, the Fed was planning on tapering at a pretty slow rate, reducing their purchases of treasuries by $10 billion less each month and their purchases of mortgage-backed securities by $5 billion each month. They were also suggesting that they would not be raising rates for some time and that they might not even start until late 2022. This is all too little too late according to Ackman, and it needs to be sped up. Waiting the best part of a year to raise rates is too passive and will allow inflation to continue to soar, and continuing to buy billions of dollars of assets that don't need financial support anymore will continue to inflate the market and increase the size of the bubble. In short, things need to change. Now, as is often the case with Ackman, it is worthwhile just stopping, slowing down, and thinking about why Ackman is saying all of this, and considering whether or not there are any ulterior motives. And the truth is that there are reasons why Ackman is saying this. The first one, and the one that he came out right at the beginning and reminded us of, is that he has positioned his portfolio to do well if interest rates rise. So it makes perfect sense that he would want rates to rise, doesn't it? He's not going to come out and say that rates are fine where they are if he's set to profit when they rise, so I can understand why some people think he's just trying to push the Fed's direction in a way that will benefit him. But to be perfectly honest, I think that's being a little bit too harsh here, and that isn't his primary motive. His real reason for saying all this, in my opinion at least, isn't so that his portfolio can profit by as much as possible, but because it's just the right thing to do. Inflation is spiraling out of control, and unless the Fed changes their ways, millions of people are going to suffer as a result of that. In fact, millions of people already are suffering as a result of the Fed's policy, and Ackman is absolutely right to try and explain why their policy needs to change. Of course, it would also be practically suicide for the Fed to continue to print money, to keep interest rates at zero as inflation spirals out of control, so it's obvious that rates will rise at some point anyway. All that Ackman is doing here is pushing the idea that the Fed needs to act quicker, as it was already clear they were going to act eventually. Ackman's portfolio would perform well anyway once the Fed changed their tune, and if they change quicker, his investments start doing well sooner, but this isn't going to be a drastic change, and it won't really have any impact on Ackman's performance over the long run. So I don't buy the idea that Ackman is only making this point to try and enrich himself. Now, funnily enough, it's actually been a while since Ackman came out with these comments, and in that time, the Fed, the markets, and the US government as a whole seems to have awoken to the threat that is posed by the Federal Reserve's actions over the last year. I'm sure you've seen, but in recent days, the sentiment in the market has changed. Fears of the Omicron variant emerged, but the threat of that variant itself isn't actually too serious. What could be serious is the government's potential reaction to the new variant. Jerome Powell came out and said that it's time to retire the word transitory when talking about inflation, which throws my suggestion for the word of the year out of the window. No, inflation is here to stay, and even the most dovish policymakers in the world don't even have the gall to claim otherwise anymore. Rate hikes are on their way, without a doubt at some point in 2022, and maybe even within the first few months of the year. Now, I'm not claiming that Bill Ackman alone is responsible for kicking the Fed into gear. It's far more likely that the market's adverse reaction to news over the last couple of weeks has done far more than he did. But he did shed some light on the issue, and he did use his position as a world-famous investor and public figure to shame an organization that has repeatedly failed to achieve what it is supposed to, and has done so with arrogance that shocked the world. No one likes to take responsibility for their mistakes, especially those who find themselves working for governments, but Yellen and Powell's utter failure as people with authority in the Federal Reserve need to be remembered for who they really are, not who they claim to be. This is a crisis of their own doing. The pain that is to come is a result of their actions, and without a doubt, they deserve all of the blame that is going to come their way. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like private live streams, extra videos, and buy and sell alerts from my own personal portfolio. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world-famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. There's also a link in the description to BLOCKFI, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get up to 9% interest on stablecoins like USDC, which is a far higher rate than you'll get from any savings account these days. Thank you all for the support. Thanks for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.